On May 10, 2025, family and friends of a young Brazilian woman started noticing something unusual. For several hours, they couldn't get a hold of her. Although some replies came from her phone, they didn't quite match her usual way of writing. The situation caused enough concern to alert the authorities. That same day, officers went to her apartment to check on what was going on. What initially seemed like a simple lack of contact ended up becoming a formal intervention. From that moment on, information would no longer come from messages or calls, but from what could be found inside that place. If you want to know all the details, I recommend you get comfortable and watch this story to the end. The case of Micaela Sagas. Every day we live alongside evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is a constant presence in our society. In Criminal Investigators, we will delve into that dark side of humanity. We will bring to the screen the most perverse crimes and try to get inside the minds of those beings who commit the most terrible acts. I'm Alex, and today I bring you another case. But before we begin, I want you to tell me where you're watching us from. We really like to know how far these stories reach. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share this video if you think someone else might be interested. And now, let's begin. On Saturday, May 10, 2025, those close to Micaela Andrea Sagas began to notice something unusual. For hours, her phone remained silent. She wasn't answering calls or messages, which didn't fit her daily routine, marked by constant contact with clients, friends, and family. However, what caught their attention most was not just the lack of response, but the messages that did arrive. During the early morning, some replies were sent from her own phone. But those who received them sensed that something wasn't right. The tone wasn't the same. The words seemed forced, as if someone else were writing. As the hours passed, the anxiety grew. They tried to communicate again, without success. The feeling that something didn't fit became increasingly obvious. Finally, faced with the prolonged silence and the strange messages, they decided to alert the authorities. The police were notified that same day. What initially seemed like a simple lack of communication was beginning to take on another dimension. Hours after the alert, in the afternoon of May 10th, police officers went to Micaela's apartment. Given the concern reported by the family and the prolonged silence, the officers decided to enter the place. Upon crossing the threshold, they were met with a scene that ruled out any doubt. Inside the apartment lay Micaela's body. The place showed clear signs of violence, and there was blood in different areas. The body showed multiple injuries, and the layout of the scene suggested it hadn't been immediate. Everything pointed to Micaela having tried to resist at some point. Quickly, the home was secured immediately, and investigation protocols were activated. With the apartment now under control, officers began to examine the scene in greater detail. In one of the rooms, the weapon used was located, a sharp object that showed clear traces. In the bathroom, investigators found a blood-stained garment that did not belong to the victim. This finding caught particular attention. In addition, certain elements suggested that someone had remained in the apartment after the incident. Not everything pointed to an immediate flight. There were signs that, after the event, actions were taken inside the place, as if someone had tried to regroup before leaving. Each of these details began to build a clearer picture. Whoever had been there not only knew the place, but had time to move around inside it after what happened. While the forensic team continued working inside the apartment, another line of investigation was beginning to take shape outside of it. Officers reviewed the building's security cameras, seeking to reconstruct what happened in the hours before and after. The recordings revealed movements that did not go unnoticed. In them, A man was seen leaving the apartment during the early morning. Minutes later, the cameras captured him returning to the building, but he didn't stay inside long. Then he left again, this time showing no obvious signs of haste. The sequence caught attention for several reasons, not only because of the entry and exit in a short interval, but because of the apparent calm in his movements. He didn't seem like someone fleeing impulsively. With those images, investigators began to profile the person who had been with Michaela in her final hours. To do this, they began to investigate the woman's inner circle. Initial checks confirmed she didn't live alone. Her partner also resided in the apartment, a man who, according to records, spent frequent time there. However, there was a detail that didn't fit. Since the authorities were notified, he hadn't appeared. He wasn't at the apartment, hadn't contacted the family, and hadn't presented himself to the police. When contrasting this information with the camera footage, the match began to be obvious. The man captured entering and leaving the building corresponded to the person living with Michaela. And to identify this man, the police began to look into the woman's life and in that way, begin to reconstruct who she was. Michaela was 29 years old and was known in Biguasu for her work as an esthetician. She had managed to establish her own business, an aesthetics clinic that bore her name, where she served a stable and growing clientele. Her daily activity was marked by that professional routine, with a constant schedule and frequent contact with those around her. On social media, she projected a polished image. She posted content related to her work, travel, and personal moments. The photographs showed her smiling, in different destinations and with friends. She also shared motivational messages linked to self-improvement and growth. Those who knew her described her as an active person, focused on her goals, and with a structured life. In addition, she participated in activities related to animal care, which was part of her usual environment. That image, built over time, contrasted with what investigators were beginning to discover about her private life, and investigators began to focus their attention on the person living with her. It was her partner, a man named Sandro Coutinho Machado Jr., with whom she had been in a relationship for about 2 years. It has not been publicly determined how the bond between them began, but over time they ended up sharing the same space. It was her partner, a man named Sandro Coutinho Machado Jr., with whom she had been in a relationship for about 2 years. It has not been publicly determined how the bond between them began, but over time they ended up sharing the same space. The cohabitation took place inside Michaela's apartment, a place that, according to subsequent testimonies, was no stranger to conflict. Neighbors in the building noted that arguments were frequent. These were not isolated episodes, but situations that over time stopped being exceptional and became a regular part of the dynamic between them. Despite this, there were no formal records of complaints. From the outside, the relationship continued without intervention, while the conflicts remained within the private sphere. Delving deeper into Sandro's profile, investigators found a history that provided additional context. He had a record for various crimes, including those related to drugs, robberies, and other violent acts. In addition, he had been released just a few months earlier, in February 2025. In that short period, he was already an active part of Michaela's life and her inner circle. His presence inside the apartment was not occasional, but constant. With Sandro now identified, the investigation allowed for a clearer reconstruction of the dynamic that existed within the relationship in the preceding months. The testimonies gathered pointed to a repeating pattern. Sandro's behavior was not limited to occasional arguments. Over time, he had adopted an increasingly controlling attitude, marked by constant jealousy and a need to monitor what Michaela was doing, even in her absence. During the process, it was confirmed that he had accessed her phone without her consent. Not only did he review conversations, but he went as far as cloning her messaging account, allowing him to keep track of her activity continuously. This level of surveillance was not sporadic, but sustained over time. While this was happening, the relationship continued to unfold within the same space. There was no clear separation between moments of conflict in daily life, which kept the tension present. But in the days leading up to the incident, that dynamic began to change. Those close to her noted that Michaela had begun to distance herself. It was no longer just about arguments, but a more concrete decision to end the relationship, as she did not feel safe. That decision marked a turning point. For Sandro, the possibility of a breakup was not something he was willing to accept. His behavior, far from diminishing, intensified during that period, raising the level of tension inside the apartment in the hours leading up to the incident. With this background, we come to Friday, May 9th, 2025. Michaela and Sandro spent the day inside the apartment. As the hours passed, the day went on without anything out of the ordinary being perceived from the outside. However, during the early morning, between 2 and 3, according to later estimates, the situation changed. It was in that interval when the event occurred inside the apartment. The clues found by investigators showed that Sandro remained in the place for an additional period. He went to the bathroom, where he showered and changed clothes, and the garment he had worn was left there, with bloodstains, becoming one of the key pieces of evidence in the case. The building's cameras reinforced that reconstruction. First he was captured, leaving in one outfit, and later returning to the apartment for a brief period. That return suggested it wasn't an impulsive flight, but a departure followed by a check or attempt to control what was left behind. Before leaving the place for good, he took Michaela's phone and also her vehicle. With that, he left the building showing no visible signs of urgency. With Michaela's phone in his possession, Sandro continued to interact with her circle over the following hours. From that device, messages were sent to family and close friends. At first glance, they seemed like normal replies, but those who received them noticed inconsistencies. The tone was not her usual one, and the answers seemed unnatural. The activity wasn't limited to sending messages. He also accessed her conversations, reviewing the content of her messaging apps. Part of that use was recorded when one of the messages was read at 10:17 in the morning, at a time when there was no longer direct contact with her. That behavior indicated something more than a simple flight. During those hours, Sandro was not only moving away from the scene, he was also trying to maintain the appearance that Michaela was still alive, at least for a while. Far from hiding immediately, Sandro continued with a series of movements that caught the attention of investigators when they were reconstructed. During the early morning, a few hours after the incident, he was seen at a nightclub in São José, a nearby city. He stayed there for a while, consuming drinks and behaving with apparent normalcy. Those who had contact with him during that period did not perceive an agitated attitude. He even commented that the relationship with Michaela had ended, giving a version that sought to explain why he was alone. While all this was happening, Michaela's body remained in the apartment, having not yet been discovered. The contrast between what happened inside the place and Sandro's subsequent behavior would become one of the most striking elements of the case. Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're finding this video interesting, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That helps us a lot to keep making more videos and telling these kinds of true stories. That said, now, let's continue with the story. While the police made progress in reconstructing what happened inside the apartment, another key piece appeared outside of it. Michaela's vehicle was abandoned in an area known for criminal activity. The area was secured for forensics, while officers tried to track possible subsequent movements. And by that time, Sandro was no longer reachable. While authorities continued their search, a new element began to circulate outside of police circles. It was a video recorded by Sandro himself that was posted on social media. In it, he appeared speaking directly to the camera, acknowledging his responsibility for what happened. In the recording, He claimed he had acted after discovering an alleged betrayal. He spoke of having lost control and justified his actions in that context. He also mentioned that he had accessed Michaela's phone and had been reviewing her conversations. The content of the video spread quickly. By that time, he was not only wanted by the police, but his face and words were starting to become public. Beyond the confession, what caught attention was the tone. He showed no obvious emotional reaction consistent with what had happened. His words seemed more like an explanation than a show of remorse. 4 days after the incident, on Tuesday, May 13, 2025, the situation took a definitive turn. Sandro presented himself at a police station accompanied by his lawyer. He wasn't located by an operation, but decided to turn himself in voluntarily. During his appearance, he confirmed what he had already previewed in the video. He admitted to being responsible for what happened inside the apartment and reiterated that he acted motivated by jealousy, insisting on the idea of an alleged betrayal. Inside the apartment, everything indicates that the situation escalated from an argument to an episode of violence in a relatively short, though not immediate, interval. There are no external records of what happened at that moment, but the scene allowed for the reconstruction of a longer sequence than might appear at first glance. The distribution of blood in different areas of the place indicated that it was not a single spot. There were movements within the apartment, suggesting that Michaela tried to move while the assault was occurring. Signs of defense reinforced that idea. Everything points to there being resistance. The assault was not instantaneous or completely surprising, but unfolded in a sequence in which the victim tried to resist. The number of injuries and their concentration in specific areas reflected an escalation in intensity. It did not correspond to a single isolated moment, but to a process that unfolded within that space without third-party intervention. Officers proceeded with his immediate arrest. By that time, the investigation already had multiple elements. The camera footage, the evidence inside the apartment, the use of Michaela's phone, and now his own confession. After the initial procedures, he was transferred to police facilities to continue with the process. His situation was handed over to the justice system while charges against him were formalized. With Sandro now in custody, the investigation moved toward consolidating the evidence and formalizing the case. Forensic reports established that there was no third-party intervention. Everything pointed to the event having unfolded solely between the two of them inside the apartment. With these elements, the prosecution was structured under an aggravated charge, not only because of the bond between them, but also because of the circumstances in which the event occurred, including the violence used and the subsequent actions. The line of investigation also considered that it was not a completely impulsive act. Some clues opened up the possibility that there was a certain degree of anticipation in what happened, which would be evaluated in the judicial process. With the progress of the process, the case reached the trial stage, where the elements gathered during the investigation were presented in a structured manner. The prosecution relied on a body of evidence that, as a whole, was consistent. Security cameras placed Sandro inside the apartment at key moments, while forensic reports confirmed what happened inside. Added to this was the use of Michaela's phone after the events and the attempt to maintain activity from her device, along with the confession he himself had broadcast. During the trial, Sandro maintained that he had acted motivated by jealousy, insisting on the idea of an alleged betrayal. However, the reconstruction of the events and the prior context were decisive for the prosecution, which pointed out not only what happened inside the apartment, but also his subsequent conduct. The court ended up considering the gravity of the facts as a whole, not only because of the bond between them, but because of the violence exerted and the actions after the event, which showed an attempt at a cover-up. Finally, a sentence was handed down. Sandro Coutinho Machado Jr. was sentenced to 70 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison for femicide, along with other charges related to the use of the victim's vehicle and phone. In addition, financial compensation was established in favor of the family. With the resolution, the case was closed in the judicial arena, backed by a line of evidence that left no room for doubt about responsibility. Michaela's case does not close solely with a sentence. A 70-year sentence establishes responsibility, but it doesn't fully explain how things reached that point. Inside that apartment, there was no isolated event, but the outcome of a dynamic that, according to what was reconstructed, had been escalating for some time, without formal complaints, without prior intervention, and with signs that, in hindsight, were already present. Beyond what happened, the case leaves an uncomfortable reading. Violence doesn't appear out of nowhere. It builds, advances, and in many cases, becomes normalized until it's too late. The conviction puts an end to the legal side. But outside of that, what remains is a story that didn't start that night and doesn't end with a sentence either. And well, dear audience, that's another investigation. What do you think of today's case? We would really like to read your comments, as your opinion on the cases is very important to us. Remember to always do so with the utmost respect possible, both for the victim and for other viewers, and us who will be reading them. Before you go, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to share this video if you think someone you know might be interested. See you in another criminal investigation. Goodbye.